Good afternoon, learners. Welcome to this afternoon's lesson. Hopefully yesterday you guys enjoyed that lesson on sorting and where we spoke about the selection sort. Okay, it's really important that you understand the working principle behind the coding. So today we're going to look at the bubble sort and at least try an example. Okay, so that's the idea for today. So if we had to continue, okay, so what are the objectives of today's lesson? We will be expanding on the terms bubble sort, illustrating how a bubble sort works, looking at a syntax or looking at the syntax of a bubble sort, and finally, an example to demonstrate the different sorting, okay? So we'll just try to incorporate what we have learned into an example. So moving straight into it, okay, so just to recap from yesterday, remember if we had to summarize what a selection sort was, a selection sort was basically sorting the values, but it was always sorting it with reference to the first value. Okay, it was comparing it, but constantly going back to the first value and checking, and that's how it was arranging the values in a particular order. Okay, so what is a bubble sort then? And again, if you are a bit unsure about a selection sort, please have a look at that video on YouTube. I did see that it is up, so please this weekend take a moment just to have a look at it if you already haven't watched that. Okay, so what is a bubble sort? This is something that I just got. As you can see, I indicated the reference over here. So bubble sort is also one of the simplest algorithms which operates. So this is so important because this is how it's different from a selection sort. It compares each item or element with the item next to it. Okay, so remember with the selection sort, we were continuously, for instance, if we was checking for the lowest value for position 1, we was constantly checking, for instance, is the value at index 1 lower than the value at index 2? Is the value at index 1 lower than the value at index 3? So we were constantly comparing the entire array to the values at index 1. And once were done with index 1, obviously we moved on to compare the values with index 2. So that's how it was obviously sorting those values. In a bubble sort, however, it compares items next to it. Okay, so it's not going back to the first value and then starting over again. It is comparing items next to it. And if you, obviously, let's just continue reading this and then an illustration will better describe how this works. Okay, so, and swapping them if needed. In simple word, it compares the first and second. It compares the first and second element of the list and swaps it unless they are out of a specific order. So that's what it's doing. Okay. Similarly, once it has done comparing the first and second value, it will go and then compare the second and third value. Once it has done with the second and third value, it will go and compare the third and the fourth value. So it's always comparing values that are next to each other. Okay, so similarly, it says over here, the second and third element are compared and swapped, and this comparing and swapping goes on until the end of the list. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's see how this looks. So this is an illustration. I think the best way to describe these sorting techniques is through an illustration. So it says, let's assume we have 6 values, and these are the same values that we obviously worked with yesterday. So let's assume we have 6 values stored in an array called array numbers. Okay, so these are the values. Obviously, the values in the array are in yellow, and the index or the position at which these values are stored is the numbers in red. So basically, just to expand on that, the number 9 is stored at index 1, number 6 is stored at index 2, 10 is stored at index 3, 3 is stored at index 4, 5 is stored at index 5 and 4 is stored at index 6. Okay, so let's look at how the bubble sort will go about arranging these values. Okay, so what our job is to do, our job is to arrange these values in ascending order. Now remember, the question doesn't only have to be in ascending order. They can request for you to put it in descending order or ascending order. Now it's nothing complicated. All you're going to do is change the sign. If you're using the less than symbol, obviously you're just going to change it to the greater than symbol, but we would look at an example just to explain that. So we're obviously arranging our values from lowest to highest. Now let's go ahead and let's see what's happening. So it says it will start comparing the value at index 1 with the value at index 2. So learners, are we following? Okay, so it says, is the value at index 2 less than the value at index 1? So can you see? And if it is the case, it's obviously going to swap the values. So again, it's going to compare the value at compare the values index 2 and the value at index 1. Now, would you agree that 6 is obviously less than 9? So that this is obviously going to swap with each other. So the 6 is going to go in the place of the 9, and the 9 is going to go in the place of the 6. Okay, so if you look at the start of it, it looks very similar to the selection sort, okay? If not identical. So just to continue with this, it says, because the value at index 2 is less than the value at index 1, the values will swap positions. I hope you agree with me. It's quite simple to understand. Okay, so did you see that the 6 is now stored at index 1 and 9 now is stored at index 2. So this is the original values in the array: 9, 6, 10, 3, 5, and 4. Once it has compared the first two values, notice what happens. It swaps around because 6 goes in the front and 9 goes thereafter. So just to talk about this, would you agree that this is almost identical, or if not identical, to the selection sort? It's exactly the same with the first comparing. So let's go ahead and see what happens next. Once the first value is compared with the second value, the comparison will continue. Okay, but notice now this is the difference. If it was a selection sort, we would keep using this first value, and in the selection sort we will say, is the first value less than the third value? Then once that is done, we will say, is the first value less than the fourth value? And obviously that's what we would do. But in a bubble sort, can you see it is comparing values that are next to each other? Okay, it's a very different technique compared to the selection sort. Please understand the difference between it. Okay, so in this slide, we can see what is going on. It says that it's obviously going to see if the value stored at index 3 is less than the value stored at index 2. So that's how the bubble sort is working. Can you see this is totally different from the selection sort? So the value stored at index 2 is now compared with the value stored at index 3, or the value next to index 2. So now let's, without even going to the slide, it's going to say, is 10 less than 9? And by looking at it, would you agree that the values will stay in their respective places? There's no swapping, there's no change going to be made at this time. Okay, so meaning that it will now take the value stored at index 2 and compare it with the value stored at index 3. It's quite simple to understand, hey? So it says over there, it goes on, it says it will now check if the value stored at index 3 is less than the value stored at index 2, meaning 10 is not less than 9. I hope you would agree with that. So the values in the array will remain as is. So without even going to, so everyone understands what happened. So we went and we compared value 1 to value 2. The second step was for us to compare value 2 to value 3. And without even going to the next slide, I want you to think about what's going to happen next in this bubble sort. Okay, take a moment to think about it, and then we would move ahead. Okay, so I'm going to move ahead to the next slide. Now, hopefully you had a chance to try it out or think about it on your own. So now it will compare the value at index 3 with the value at index 4. Can you see how it's working its way throughout the array? Okay, can you see? Obviously, it's going to go there and it's going to go there. So that is why it's called a bubble sort. Okay, so it will check if the value stored at index 4 is less than the value stored at index 3. 3 is less than 10. I'm sure you'd agree with me. So before we even move to the slide, would you agree that the values will swap positions? 3 will go at index 3 and the value 10 will go at index 4. Okay, so everyone agrees with that? Let's move on and see what happens. So this next slide says the number 3 is now at index 3 and the number 10 is now at index 4. Everyone should be really glad, everyone should really understand that it's nothing complicated. So we worked our way from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. You can imagine what's going to happen next. It will say it will now check if the value stored at index 5 is less than the value stored at index 4. Is the value stored at index 5 less than the value stored at index 4? Obviously, yes, that's the case. 5 is less than 10. So if we move on to the next slide, did you see that 5 goes to index 4 and 10 goes to index 5? Now, let's just finish this off. Finally, the value stored at index 6 is compared with the value stored at index 5. If the value at index 6 is smaller than the index 5, then they will swap. Now, would you agree that 4 is less than 10? Okay, so what's going to happen? 4 is going to go to index 5 and 10 is now going to go to index 6. That's what's going to happen. Now, that is just sorting out one of those values. And I want you to take notice of what happened when we started sorting these values or arranging these values. Did you notice as we began sorting, the largest value ended up at index 6? Can you take note of that? As we started sorting, we obviously was looking for the lowest value, but as we started comparing it against each other, the largest value ended up at the last index or the last position in the array. Now that's always going to happen, okay? So hopefully you guys understood. I'm not going to do, as I told you yesterday, the idea is just to go through you how one value would be arranged, and the process is obviously going to be repeated. But what will happen next? Okay, so what will happen after it is done with arranging the first set of values? Now, learners, what will happen is the process will start again. So it will say, let's start with comparing the value at index 1 with the value at index 2. Once it has done that, it will say, let's compare the value at index 2 with index 3. And that process is going to go on and on and on. What you will eventually end up with is numbers that are from lowest to highest, okay? What you will end up with is numbers that are from lowest to highest. Now, I want you to, in addition to noting that the highest number is at the end, this is how the bubble sort also differs in relation to the selection sort. With the bubble sort, it starts sorting from the last index. So can you see when it found that the first time this comparison took place, it started sorting from the last index in the array. So that's really important. With the selection sort, it started working from the first value, whereas with the bubble sort, it starts arranging from the last index in the array, and it will obviously work its way down. So really important again. Okay, so hopefully you understood what the bubble sort was and what the selection sort was. Okay, so I'm going to move ahead, and we're going to say, what do we need for the bubble sort? Okay, what do we need for the bubble sort? Same as with the selection sort, we would obviously need 2 for loops. And if you watched yesterday's lesson, or you tuned in for yesterday's lesson, you would realize why we needed 2 for loops. Okay, we needed an if statement. Same, obviously we're comparing values, so we need to have some kind of structure to test that. And if we move ahead, we said, if you again, I just copied this from yesterday's slide. Remember, it wasn't so simple for us just to swap the values. We couldn't say, okay, once the value at index 2 was lower than index 1, we couldn't just assign or swap the values around, because what would happen? You would agree that we would lose the contents of one of those values. Okay, so how would we have done this? As I said again, the best way to think about how you would sort an array is thinking about it in a real life situation. If you had, for instance, these 2 boxes and you were asked to switch the contents, take the contents from box 1 and place it into box 2, and take the contents from box 2 and place it back into box 1. I'm sure you would agree with me that in doing that, you would lose one of those, or you would mix the contents up. So what would be the feasible answer to obviously switching or swapping the values without mixing it up or without losing those values? The feasible option would be to obviously create another box or have another box so that we can place the contents of box 1 in there, and then obviously we could swap the contents and take the contents from the temporary box back into box 2. So hopefully you guys understood what the purpose of the temporary variable was there for. Now, before we move ahead and look at an example, I just want to show you the syntax of this, and it's obviously the for loop. Unlike the bubble sort or the selection sort rather, where we stopped at 1 less than the value, the bubble sort goes to the size of the array plus 1. The second for loop, as we said yesterday, the purpose of 2 for loops is because we need to compare 2 different we need to compare 2 values in the array. And obviously, in order for us to compare 2 values in the array, we need values stored at different positions. For instance, you need the value stored at index 1 to compare with the value stored at index 2. So that is what the purpose of the 2 for loops are doing. Again, the same principle applies. We obviously go ahead, have the if statements, we do whatever we have to, but please take note of this j plus 1. Okay, because unlike the selection structure where we had I plus 1, here we're obviously going to force that into the if statement. Okay, so please take a look, understand how the code for a bubble sort looks, and then we would look at an example. Okay, I think that will tie up this week's content quite nicely. So remember, when we go ahead, and I'm going to do the example now, I am not going to, remember, as I told you yesterday, you can choose whichever type of sorting technique you want to use, either the bubble sort or the selection sort. Now, personally, I prefer the selection sort, but you're welcome to obviously use whichever sort you would like. So when I'm attempting this example now, I'm going to try it with the selection sort. What I would suggest is understand the working principle of both sorting techniques, but decide on which one you want to use and stick with that. Don't try to say, no, I'm going to try both or see which. Just decide on which one you prefer using or which one is most easiest for you to understand and stick to that. Obviously, they will ask you to be able to explain the working principle in the theory paper. But again, as I said yesterday, they don't usually state which type of sorting technique to use. So we're going to go ahead and try this example out. Again, it's a really simple interface. You know by now, I don't try to create complicated interfaces. The whole idea of these interfaces the whole idea is for us to come up with the code. Okay, so a simple form, you can do this at home as well. A simple form a button for generate values, another button for display values, and another button for sort in ascending order. Okay, so we're going to see how the code that, or how the syntax that we learned yesterday and today will get applied into a scenario type question. Again, learners, if there's any questions that you do have, please don't forget to send them through. And if it is appropriate, I will be able to answer it. So please, again, send it through if you do have any questions. So we're looking at this example, okay? I'm going to move ahead and we're going to look at this, what's required for us. So it says do the following, okay? Create an array called iArrayNumbers to randomly generate 20 values in the range 10 to 100. As I said, if you had a small amount of values, like 6 values, then you could have compared it, even maybe you could even done it without the sorting techniques. But because you have a large amount of values, in this case we said 20, it's not going to be the most feasible thing to do it without one of the sorting techniques. Okay, so we're going to create this array called iArrayNumbers. Everyone can see what's going on over here. So this is where I see learners messing it up though. When the question gets randomly generate 20 values in the range 10 to 100, I'm not saying that every one of all the learners do it. Obviously there's 80% of them who will do it correctly, but there's some of them who would confuse this as being the size of the array. I don't know why they would assume it as that, and you're probably thinking that's so stupid of them to think that, but trust me when I say under pressure, we tend to not look at the finer details. So again, would you agree that the size of the array would be 20? And this is obviously going to incorporate the use of the random range function. Okay, so using a dialog box, inform the user that the values have been generated. Now what you will see, this is a really simple, the generate part, or the generate button, is a really simple thing. I didn't try to make it too complicated because my aim was for me to demonstrate the sorting. So we didn't want to make it too complicated where you lose what the essence or what the objective of this question really is, which is for the sorting principle. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do this together, okay? So I'm going to go ahead. I created the interface already. So we're going to go into Delphi. Okay, and we're going to try to do this together. Okay, so I'm assuming you guys can see the Delphi screen. And again, if there's anything that's not being displayed, please just let the host know about that using your comments so that he can notify me. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to declare, as I said, it's a really simple example. There shouldn't be any queries with that. I'm just going to see if my program runs. Remember, that's the first thing that you want to do, is to just run your program without any code. So I'm going to go ahead. It said create an array called iArrayNumbers. Now, again, this was so simple. There shouldn't be any questions on this. We tried to eliminate any confusion with regards to this. Would you agree that the size of the array is 20 and I'm doing integer values? Okay, so that is the declaration of the array. Okay, perfect. Everyone's happy with that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to double click on the generate values button. Okay, I'm going to double click on the generate values button. I'm not going to switch over to the slide, but I will tell you what the question was. It said randomly generate 20 values in the range of 10 to 100. Okay, and display a message informing the user that the values has been generated. So obviously we're going to store values in the array. So I'm going to go ahead and use my for loop. I'm going to run my for loop for I is equal to 1 to, would you agree to what? To 20. Would you agree that it will be 20 because we have 20 values that we need to store in this array. Now we want to store the values in this array, so I'm going to call up the array. Remember, it's an array, so it's different from a variable. Obviously, physically looking at it, so we're going to put the square brackets, and I'm going to send in the position, which is I. I'm going to use random range. If you were with me for the past 2 weeks, you know that I prefer that. And it's set in the range 10 to 100. So obviously I'm going to go 10 to 101. I'm not even going to talk about that because we know that we always stop at 1 higher than the value that was specified in the question. Now, again, this is also a very simple error that we see over here. We obviously have to go to users and say comma math, and we import that package, which gives us access to the random range. It said go ahead and indicate to the user that the values were generated. So I'm coming out of the for loop, and I'm just going to put a show message. Again, you're welcome to use a message dialog. I don't have an issue with that. I feel for the same amount of marks, it's just easier for you to just use a show message. Okay, they're not fussy on that with regards to that. So again, I wanted to store 20 values. That's the reason for the for loop going 20 times, being repeated 20 times. What would I like to repeat 20 times? Obviously, this statement that I see within the for loop, and the random range, and finally the show message. Okay, I'm not going to run the program immediately. I want to finish off the code so that we have time for questions as well. So I'm going to go and show you guys the next part of the next slide so that we can do this and we can finish off and still have time for questions. So learners, would you agree that we did the input? Okay, we did the input. We went ahead and we created this variable. We did all that was required, not input rather, but generating values. Okay, there wasn't any input. We were randomly generating those values. So I'm going to go ahead. Okay, and the display button. So I'm going to do this quickly. Okay, when I click this display button, it should display the 20 values vertically, one below each other. Again, this is the simplest of displaying. You would agree with me that it's the harder one is obviously the one where you have to involve string and character handling. So just take note of this. This is what we're going to do. We're going to display the values in the array vertically. And I'm going to do that quickly because, as I said, the objective of this question is to demonstrate the sorting. So I'm going to go back into Delphi. Okay, I'm going to go back into Delphi, and this is what you should be seeing our code. Okay, and I'm going to double click on the display values button. I want to display the contents in my array, which means that I need to have the for loop. So that's quite simple. I'm going to do that for I is equal to 1 to 20. Okay. Begin. Okay, so I want to display the contents of my array in a rich edit. So I called my rich edit red display. So red display.lines.add. And remember, everything comes in as a string and it needs to be sent out as a string. So I'm saying int to string, and I'm going to call up my array, which is I array numbers. Let me just type it out. It'll be much quicker. And we send in I. Okay, so really simple. Okay. Okay, so everyone's happy with that. That's displaying the contents of the array vertically. It's looking good for time. It's 2:30. We can finish off the sorting quite well. So this is displaying the contents vertically. Okay, so just take a moment, look at that. Okay, so learners, I hope you're fine with that. We're going to go finally to the question, to the slide, so that we can see what the last part of the question is. Okay, and so let's go ahead. Let's just finish this off. Okay, so the last part. Okay, so when we click the sort in ascending order, I want you to arrange the numbers in ascending order. Now, how is this going to work? Okay, when I click this button, it should sort the information, but I want to click on the display values again so that it will show the values in ascending order. Now, if you're trying this at home, let me tell you again how it's going to work. You're going to do your code in the sort ascending order button. Okay, once the code is done, and when you click on display thereafter, it should display the values in ascending order. Okay, so that's what you're going to have to do when you're testing your program. So I know that the previous values may not, obviously these were random values, and I screenshotted this from two different sets of random values. And remember, even when you test it at home, because it's random values, it's not necessarily going to be the same, or it won't be the same. It's such a high chance, it's such an unlikely chance that it'll ever be the same. Okay, so remember, can you see what's happening? It's going from the lowest value, 16, 20, etc., all the way to the highest. So that's what ascending is, from lowest to highest. Can you see how nicely it did it? So let's go back to Delphi. We're still looking good for time. Okay, so I'm going to Delphi and I'm going to share with you, going into Delphi. Okay, so we're going to look at this. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's code this. Okay, so this is what I was really wanted you guys to see. This is where I want to spend some time. So I'm going to go ahead, and remember, we want to sort the values in ascending order. Okay, so I'm going to create a variable to use the array integer, and I'm going to and I'm then going to go ahead and begin my for loop. Obviously, I'm going to say for I is equal to 1. I'm doing the selection sort. Okay, I'm doing the selection sort. So for I is equal to 1 to 19. Begin. Okay, so remember, can you see when we're doing the selection sort, because there were 20 values in my array, I went ahead and I used up to 19. So that's so important. Okay, so if there's 100, you stop at 99, etc. So I stopped at one less, and that's always what you're going to do. You're always going to stop at one less. Okay, so for J, remember the next for loop is going to be equal to I plus 1. Now that's what we spoke about, so I'm not even going to talk to you. The purpose of the two for loops is for us to compare the value at one position with the value at the next position. Okay, so for J is equal to I plus 1 to 20. Now, did you notice this? Please, before we move along, and I don't want to rush this, but I'm going to say this over here. Take note that the first loop stopped at 19, and then I'm going to say take note of the I plus 1 in the second loop. It's always going to be like that, learners, if you're using the selection sort, okay? And then we stopped at 20 because there are 20 values in my array. So I'm going to go ahead and declare a variable for J, because that's the two for loops. Now this is the easiest part, because remember, we want to compare, so we're going to have an if statement. What would we like to compare? We would like to compare the values at I array numbers at the first for loop, I at the first position, with the values at the second position, okay, which is obviously going to be J. Okay, so that's what the if statement is about. And this is what I will tell you though. Take note in this part, take note of the symbol over here. Okay, that is used for ascending, and obviously the less than symbol will be used for descending. So that's really important. So we're saying if we obviously want to compare these numbers, and if in fact they are lower than the value at the previous index, we want to swap it. So we needed a temp variable to do that. So I'm going ahead and creating this temp variable. I hope you all agree with me that we needed this temp variable. And we'll say iTemp is equal to iArray numbers at position I. Remember, we want to take the contents from the first box and we want to place it in this temporary box. Then really simple, now that the iArray numbers I has become free, or there's nothing in it, we can say that iArray numbers I is equal to iArray numbers at J. Okay, makes sense, agree. And then finally, iArray numbers at J is equal to iArray numbers at I. iArray numbers at J is equal to iTemp. Okay, so please take note of this and understand about why the sorting is. Again, from the top, we spoke about one value less than the size of the array for the first for loop, the I plus 1 for the second for loop, the greater than, and doing the sorting in the center. Now we want to show a message to the user saying values has been sorted. Okay, values sorted in ascending order. Okay, and then obviously we want to run our program and see whether it works for us. Okay, so everyone's happy with that. That's our sorting. Again, once it is later on YouTube, please take a moment to look at it and see how it works. So I'm going ahead, I'm running the program. I will share that with you guys now. So let's go and share that with you guys. Okay, so you should be able to see the form in front of you. Now, when we click the generate values, the value should be randomly generated, and a message box should pop up saying that values have been generated. So you can see this. Okay. Display values. Okay, so everyone can see that the values has been displayed. Okay, but there's something that I didn't do, and I'm just going to do that quickly. I should have cleared my rich edit first and then displayed the new set of values. I'm just going to stop my program. Okay, I'm just going to share with you my Delphi screen. We're almost done. Okay, I'm just going to share with you my Delphi, and we're just going to go to the display button, and we're just going to clear our rich edit. Okay, so this is my display, and I'm just going to clear my rich edit because once the values has been sorted, we want to display the sorted values. Okay, we don't want to display the unsorted values with the sorted values. It's not going to look good. Okay, so I want to clear that, and now I can run my program. Okay, I'm going to share that with you quickly. Okay, remember we just had to rich edit.clear, and I'm going to share that form with you. Okay, so let's click on generate. We see the values has been generated. Display, everyone's happy with that, and then we click on the sort button. Remember, we click on the sort button, it should tell us that the values has been sorted, and then we click on display again. So we click on sort. I'm hoping you can see this dialog box. It says values sorted in ascending order. I click OK. Now I have to click display values again for me to see the values in ascending order. Now look at that. 10, 14, 27, 24, 28, etc. So again, that is what that's the sorting technique that I like to use. It is the selection sort, but you're welcome to try it out with the bubble sort as well. It is obviously to ensure that you are comfortable with what you have is with what you have, with what you're doing. Okay, so I'm going to go finally, and we're going to, are there any questions? Okay, so I'm looking at this. Okay, I'm just seeing if there's any questions. Okay, there's no questions, so I'm just going to summarize this lesson. I'm going to go back to my presentation, and we're just going to sum everything up for today. Okay, so we go ahead. Okay, so what is the takeaway message from this, learners? It's understanding what it means to sort an array. The selection sort we spoke about, hopefully you guys have a good understanding of what the selection sort is about. The bubble sort we spoke about again today, so hopefully that's good. And we finally looked at an example of how to apply these, or one of these techniques, into our exam questions if it does get asked. I hope this lesson was beneficial, learners. Remember, we will continue again on Tuesday. Have a nice weekend, and please have a look at the other videos just to make sure that you guys are masters at two-dimensional array or one-dimensional arrays. Take care, learners. I will talk to you again on Tuesday. Bye.